So I think that's the right approach. But here's what I'd like President Biden to know and the country to know. If we don't fix parole, there will be no deal. What do I mean by that? The numbers are just absolutely shocking. The tool the Biden administration uses to implement its open border policy is the tool called parole. From 2013, FY 2014, which would cover part of 2013, the last decade, Obama and Trump on average paroled 5,623 people on average. Last year, FY 22, the Biden administration paroled 795,561 people. The law requires an individual analysis of the parole request based on two factors: unique humanitarian need or special benefit to the country. There's no way in hell they did an individual analysis on 795,561 people. This blanket parole approach, I think, is illegal. I think the Biden administration will lose in court. They paroled over 140,000 people from 4 countries. I think it's Nicaragua, Venezuela, Cuba, what's the other one? Haiti. That is not the law. The statute regarding parole requires an individual analysis based on 2 very specific factors. So they have been abusing the tool called parole, and when you compare it to what other presidents have done, they went from 5,623 a year to 795,561 last year. What about this year, FY 23? Well, they're at 802,764 in fiscal year 23, which ended September FY 23, that started in September. We don't know the last quarter. It's going to be well over 1 million. So in FY 23, when we get all the numbers in, you're going to have about 1.2 million people have been paroled. To the American people, what the Biden administration is doing is illegal. It's incentivizing more illegal immigration. It is the tool of choice by the Biden administration to implement an open borders policy. Mr. President, there will be no deal. There will be no money for Ukraine, no money for Israel, no money for our own needs unless you stop the abuse of parole as well as other things. Senator Lankford has done a very good job of reforming the asylum law. He's done a good job of implementing new expedited removal procedures that will allow us to get better control over the border. But no matter what we do in terms of asylum and other areas of immigration reform at the border, if you don't fix parole, it's all for nothing. So I think there's a very clear message going to be coming from Republicans in Congress, not just in the Senate, but also the House. We need to stop what Biden is doing. If you want a supplemental to get through the United States Senate and eventually through the House, you have to stop abusing parole. Most Americans have no idea that when President Obama and Trump, when they were president, we used this authority on average 5,600 for the entire year. This FY 23 will be 1.2 million. This is why everybody's so upset with Mayorkas. They're abusing the law. In these negotiations, they're looking for every way to get around the law. No matter how you write it, none of us trust the Biden administration to implement the law. So there needs to be a hard cap on parole. There needs to be a reforming of the parole law. They need to go back to the original intent of the law of applying an individual analysis to each parole application. There needs to be a reporting requirement to Congress every month. Who did you parole, and why did you decide to parole that individual based on these 2 factors? That, to me, is a minimum in these negotiations, that we get back to the intent of the parole statute, that we get back to how it was used during the Obama-Trump years, and we stop the abuse of parole. There's no way you go from 5,000 a year to 1.2 million unless you want open borders. This is Exhibit A as to who they are in the Biden administration. And if you don't rein in this authority, they will keep waving people through until somebody stops them. This is the best chance I've seen since I've been up here to have true border security reform. I am willing to help Ukraine. I want to help Ukraine. God knows Israel needs help. But I can't help Israel and Ukraine until I help our own country. And if you want to deal, Mr. President, stop abusing parole. Agree to a change in the parole law that will limit what you do and others that would come after you. And without fixing the parole problem, there will be no defense supplemental. Senator Thune.
Well, thanks, Lindsey, and thanks for drawing attention to this really important issue. I want to thank Senator Langford, as Senator Graham mentioned, has done an outstanding job pushing hard for serious, meaningful, real border reforms that will stem the flow at our southern border and regain operational control of something that is completely out of control and has become a national security crisis. The numbers speak for themselves. You know, Lindsey has again put together the data on this, but when you look at the former presidencies of both Obama and Trump and the way parole was used, it was 5,623 on average per year. And then you look at 800,000 in FY22, 800,000 in FY23, and we think over 1 million if we stay on pace for fiscal year 2024. And what's significant about that is that of the people who come in across the border illegally today, 95% are being released into the interior of the United States. And what's the mechanism for doing that? It's the abuse and misuse of this parole authority. This has to stop. Now, if you look just again at the numbers, in December we made this, if you look at the average daily count throughout the month of December, it was 9,700 people every single day. And you look at last year on the terrorist watch list, 159 people were apprehended trying to come across the border illegally that are on the terrorist watch list. And that doesn't include the gotaways. But that 159 is six times the previous years combined. So this is out of control. It is a huge national security risk and danger to our country when we don't know who is coming across the southern border, the people that are getting away, but the people that we're apprehending, we know, are criminals, gang members, members of the terrorist watch list, and this situation has to be gotten under control. So as Senator Graham has pointed out, as these negotiations, we hope, conclude soon, there have been some significant gains made in terms of policies that are real and that reduce these pull factors that are encouraging people to continue to come across the border illegally, dealing with asylum, dealing with border security measures, whether that be a physical wall or technical barriers, dealing with the issue of expedited removal. But you cannot fix the problem that we have, the crisis that we have at our southern border, unless you address this critical issue of the abuse by this administration of the parole authority. It has to stop, and it's got to stop now.
Just one thing, Senator Langford told us, I think a couple of months ago, that parole was a red line for the White House. And to the White House, it's a red line for all of us. You're not going to be allowed to continue to do this. You're not going to be allowed to abuse the law. You're not going to be allowed to bring about 1.2 million people into the country in calendar year 2023 in perpetuity. The law was written in a fashion to require an individual analysis, not blanket parole. Prior presidents, Republicans and Democrats, on average were at 5,600. Now these folks in the Biden administration are pushing 1 million. It is a red line for all of us that parole be reformed. Without parole reform, there will be no supplemental.
Can you talk about whether you oppose use of parole for Afghan refugees and Ukrainians? And then also, Senator Langford has described these negotiations and his interest in parole as really focused on the use of parole at ports of entry, that is, through the CBP-1 Act, and also between ports of entry for migrants. those are separate issues from everything you're describing. Would a reform focused on that be enough?
Well, we have 125,000 spots for refugees, people that can apply for admission into the country from overseas. That's available to Afghans. We're looking at the Afghan Adjustment Act for people that got here. But there have been crises all over the world ever since we've been around. During the Obama-Trump years, look how they use parole. There is no good explanation for going from 5,000 on average a year to almost 1 million. The only explanation is they're abusing the tool because they want to get as many people in the country as they can. So the constant question for Republicans, who are we dealing with? Are we dealing with incompetent people or people who have an agenda? I think this is Exhibit A. They have an agenda. There is no way in hell you can have the numbers go from 5,623 to over 800,000 without you intending to bring people into the country. Wholesale ignoring the law. We're going to win the lawsuit. But Governor Abbott apparently told John Cornyn something very important as to why we should act now. Are you expecting me to sit on the sidelines for the rest of this year to take 1 million more? No, I'm not. To those who think that if President Trump wins, which I hope he does, that we can get a better deal, you won't. You got to get 60 votes in the United States Senate. What Senator Lankford's been able to achieve in asylum and expedited removal in other areas along the border, I think are meaningful reforms. But none of those reforms will work until you deal with parole. So to my Republican friends, to get this kind of border security without granting a pathway to citizenship is really unheard of. So if you think you're going to get a better deal next time, in 25, if President Trump's president, Democrats will be expecting a pathway to citizenship for that, in my view. So to my Republican colleagues, this is a historic moment to reform the border in a way that would give tools to the next president they don't have today and lessen the flow to take pressure off people in Texas and Arizona and all throughout the border. Yep.
When you talk about placing a cap on parole, what sort of number are you looking at?
I'm going to leave that up. I'm going to leave that up to the negotiators and let Senator Thune. What we got to do is go home and tell people we fixed the problem. So most Americans, I bet you didn't know this. I didn't know it either. Most Americans have no idea how parole is being abused until now, until this very moment. When I had my staff look at the numbers, how has parole been used in the past? So when you go back for the last decade, it's 5,623 on average per year. And look what they did last year. Look what they're doing this year. So without a cap, you're going to have to prove to me you've changed the law in such a fashion that this stops. I don't know if you can get there without a cap.
You said that Senator Lankford has made meaningful progress on
Yes.
asylum reform, expedited removal. You said that parole is a red line with the White House. If that's the case, given the pressing and time-sensitive national security threats facing this country, wouldn't it be better to just take a half a loaf and then...
Absolutely not. I want to help Ukraine as much as anybody in the entire Senate. But I'm not going to go home and lie to my people in South Carolina. There is no such. This is a hole that has to be plugged. After finding out the numbers, it would be completely irresponsible for us as Republicans to say we reformed the border. We've come up with new border security measures unless you deal with the tool that's being used by the open borders crowd in the Biden administration. There is no way in hell we're going to allow this system to go unaddressed.
Yeah, I think it's just, Senator Graham covered it really well, but I don't think there aren't 60 votes for a national security supplemental appropriations package that doesn't have serious, meaningful border control measures in it and that don't address this fundamental issue. I mean, if this is what's being used to allow 95% of the people who come into this country illegally to be released into the interior. So parole's got to be a part of the package, and how they do that, and I know there are some conversations, ongoing right now about the best way to achieve that. but it's got to be addressed, along with asylum and the other things that we mentioned.
Thank you. Can I ask what your response is to concerns that DHS has regarding this issue? They're worried that if you curtail parole the way you want to, that would basically require them to detain these numbers of people at the border, and they don't have the resources to do it. How do you oppose it?
Number one, this is a magnet. When 85% of the people who show up at the border get released into the country, you're never going to change illegal immigration. 95, I'm sorry. When 95 out of 100 people get into the country, they're going to come in perpetuity. This is the tool they're using to get around the law that exists today. They're abusing the law. There is no legal justification for what they're doing. Again, this is like 150 times increase of past presidents. To me, this is Exhibit A that the Biden administration, unchecked, will never stop this problem. How do you get control of your border? You send people back. There's 1.3 million people in this country with a final order of removal. How about this idea? Send some of them back. They've had due process. They're waiting around to be sent home. When people see people leaving America, and it's harder to get in, the numbers will go down. So to President Biden and to my Democratic friends who talk to me about Ukraine, I'm with you on Ukraine. But if you expect me to give you a pass on this, you're crazy. There's no way any of us are going to give you a pass to allow you to continue to parole people into the country, over 800,000 a year this year, calendar year F23, 1.2 million. That's going to stop. If this parole authority means that much to you to let Western Europe crumble, so be it. We're having to make them do this, by the way. They should want to change this system.
And one quick follow-up, if I may, Senator?
Yeah.
You did mention former President Trump. Do you believe that if there is a deal, it can get the votes to pass the Senate and, more importantly, the House without his support, or does it have to have his support?
Well, I'll be glad to brief President Trump about what we have, but right now I could tell him what we have is woefully inadequate because we've done nothing meaningful to deal with parole.
Why do you think there's such a disconnect between Senate Republicans and House Republicans on this issue? Just this morning, Speaker Johnson said now is not the time for comprehensive immigration.
I agree with him. There is no disconnect. None. Zero. Zip. We're not giving any pathway to citizenship. Period. We're securing our border because it's a national security nightmare. So there's a disconnect on your end. Nobody is suggesting on the Republican side in the Senate that you get something for border security other than a more secure nation and money for Ukraine and money for Israel. So I think the Speaker is very much in line with where we're at. I've done immigration reform many times. This is not immigration reform, folks. This is trying to gain control of a border that's completely in chaos. 170-something people on the terror watch list have come across the border in recent years. Everything is going up in the wrong way. So this is not about immigration reform. This is about border security.
And let me just add to that, it's 170 million people, or 170 people on the terrorist watch list just this last year. But to the point about that, and this is not comprehensive, this is border security reform, something that we've been advocating since I've been here, I think, in the United States Senate. And I would just say, too, and again, I understand the House is going to have their own way of dealing with whatever. If we can get something out of the Senate, they'll have to figure out how they're going to process it. But I will say this. Any idea that somehow, if we get majorities next year and we get the White House, that this gets done with the Republican majority of the Senate, I think doesn't understand the Democrats. The Democrats will not give us anything close to this if we have to get 60 votes in the United States Senate in a Republican majority. We have a unique opportunity here, and the timing is right to do this, and what the Democrats get out of this is funding that the administration and the White House and many of the Democrats here in the Senate want for Ukraine.
Senator Graham, given your last comments, would you have problems with expedited work permits or some concessions on immigration?
I'm going to leave it up to Senator Langford to find out, what's the pathway forward. I guess here's what I would say about the Senate. H.R. 2 came out of the House, very strong. It got 0 Democratic votes in the House.
In the Senate,
Excuse me. Well, no, H.R. 2 came out of the House without any Democratic support.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, we're supposed to get 60. So how do we get 11 Democrats when they couldn't get any? We've lost Rand Paul. He's against H.R. 2. So I understand H.R. 2, but here, I also understand civics. If you pass a bill in the Republican-controlled House without one Democratic vote, it's very difficult for us, Senator Thune, the whip, to go get 11 Democrats to do something not one Democrat in the House would do, and we've actually lost Rand Paul. So where are we at? We have a historic opportunity to bring about border security reform, to stop the abuse of parole, to get substantial changes, but not what I would like completely, because the only way you ever get the border secured, in my opinion, is have a Republican president willing to do it. But we're going to insist on major changes as part of the supplemental to the White House. We've exposed you for who you are. You're absolutely abusing the law when it comes to a parole, and don't even think about submitting a bill to the Senate that will get 60 votes until we fix this problem.
Senator, you,
Go ahead.
you repeatedly accused the administration of abusing the law.
Yeah, I have.
Why haven't there been court rulings?
There are cases right now.
But they don't seem to be moving.
Well, they're not moving as fast as I would like. So, you know what I worry about every day? Waking up, some terrorist comes in and kills us. I've never seen the conditions for another 9/11 against our homeland better than right now. The failures in Afghanistan has put every jihadist on steroids. Hamas is calling for an attack on the United States. They want to punish us for helping Israel. And we got a border that's completely broken. They're waving people through. They're not doing an individual analysis. Only God knows. This app they have where you put your name down and where you live, they let you in, give you a work permit. That's a joke. We're playing Russian roulette with the American people's national security by having a completely broken border. So at the end of the day, we don't have time to wait on the lawsuit. And Governor Abbott said, I don't have time to wait for the November election. I need help, and I need it now.
Speaker Johnson's already in some hot water about this CR that you're all trying to get over the finish line. How do you convince him, when you get this deal done, to do something that's only going to put him in more hot water if may push him over the vacation?
Here's what I would say. If you're a really conservative person, you'd want to fix things the best you could. So H.R. 2 was unable to get any Democratic support in the Senate and the House. We lost one Republican in the Senate. So to the conservative world, you have a unique opportunity, as Senator Thune described, to get border security reform without giving amnesty or a pathway to citizenship to one person. This moment will pass. Do not let it pass.
Senator Graham, big picture, I just want to ask you, you were part of a group about a decade ago that negotiated an immigration bill.
Yeah.
Very different than what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
Why have things changed so much? And I guess what are your observations about how immigration policy?
The criticism in the past has been that Democrats really don't want secure borders. All the bills we had in the past had border security, had a strong border security. The Democratic Party has changed. The Democratic Party that existed in 2013 doesn't exist today. AOC and that crowd, they would rebel against what we did in 2013. So rather than trying to tell you what people think, I'm going to tell you what they're doing. What they're doing is creating a nightmare for American national security by enticing people from all over the world to take a dangerous journey. When you get to our border, you have a 95% chance of getting released in the United States. Until that changes, nothing will ever change. And the tool most abused is parole. So we're down to the last 10-yard line, I think, inside the 20 for sure, on border security supplemental negotiations. What stands out to me like a signal from space that you can see from space is parole. They have resisted at every turn any effort on part of Senator Lankford to bring about meaningful parole reform. It is now time to call the question. If you do not address this problem in a meaningful way, there will be no bill, and you have nobody to blame but yourself. To expect Republicans, and I hope some Democrats, to sit on the sidelines and watch you do this forever is ridiculous. We're not going to allow you to go from 5,623 in past administrations to 802,000 without the fourth quarter numbers even being reported. That is not going to continue. Thank you.